On November 3rd, I started sleeping in an adjustable bed with my legs propped up at an incline to help blood flow in the leg that was recovering from a DVT. It felt like a small, doctor-approved fix for one specific problem. 63 days later, the low back pain that had been building quietly became a round-the-clock problem. 9 days after that, I was diagnosed with a herniated disc, and my resting heart rate had been climbing the entire time. Here's the same disclaimer as always. I'm not a doctor and I'm not a PT. I'm a data guy with 2 torn quad tendons, a blood clot, and now a herniated disc, and a watch that logged all of it. This is the strongest forward-looking signal anywhere in 3 years of data. It's a slow climb that started 5 weeks before I felt the first twinge of back pain, and more than 2 months before a doctor confirmed what was wrong. I'll walk through what caused it, what the data showed, and why I still don't want you to treat this as an early warning system. This one starts as a side effect of treating a different problem. Part of my DVT treatment that I mentioned in the last video was to elevate the affected leg while I slept to help with blood flow through the damaged veins. The easiest way I found to do that consistently was to sleep in an adjustable bed with the bottom half set at an incline. Right after I got the bed set up on November 3rd, I started sleeping with my legs above my heart that very night. What I did not account for was what weeks of sleeping with my lower body at a sustained incline would do to a lumbar spine that was already compensating for months of altered gait from a quad tendon recovery. After about a week or two of this nighttime position, I started noticing lower back pain. I did the same thing with it that I did with the calf tenderness in the DVT video. I noticed it, I had a plausible explanation ready, and I didn't treat it as urgent. The pain built over the following weeks. It became excruciating during the nights and when I first woke up, but would generally ease up as I moved about my day. The switch flipped on January 5th when I was doing a knee rehab workout. From that point on, the pain was constant. It wasn't the intermittent ache of the previous weeks, but something that didn't quiet down between morning and night. By January 8th, it had progressed to radiculopathy down the left leg, with foot drop severe enough that my foot flopped with every step. My medical team diagnosed a herniated disc on January 14th. An MRI on February 11th confirmed it, though by then I was already several weeks into intensive PT and starting to improve. Now I was dealing with yet another setback, caused in large part by weeks spent solving one problem while quietly creating another. Here's what the resting heart rate data did across that same window. Starting November 3rd, the day I started sleeping in the adjustable bed, my 7-day rolling average began a slow, steady climb of plus 0.1 beats per minute every single day. That's a small number on its own, but it compounds. Over 5 weeks, it adds up to several beats per minute, and the trend was statistically significant at p of less than 0.001, which means it's essentially certain this wasn't just random noise. On December 8th, the rolling average crossed 1 standard deviation above my baseline. That first warning landed 37 days before the herniated disc was diagnosed on January 14th. The signal wasn't a perfectly straight line. It ran high through December, eased for about a week in early January, then climbed again toward its February peak. But the elevated trend was unmistakable, and it sat there unwatched while the actual injury built underneath it. Line every single day from December 8th through the clinical diagnosis on January 14th. That's 37 consecutive days of an elevated signal that sat there unwatched while the actual injury built underneath it. Compare that to the tendon tears from earlier videos. Those were step changes. A jump within days of the injury, then a slow decline back to normal. This is the opposite shape, a quiet, consistent upward drift, sustained for over a month, that turned out to be the clearest signal in the entire 3-year data set. Here's where the chart gets more useful than just being a cautionary tale about a missed signal. After the diagnosis on January 14th, the rolling average didn't stop climbing. Through the weeks of PT and nerve pain that followed, The signal kept drifting upward at roughly plus 0.08 beats per minute per day. Statistically significant, in the same direction as before. The 7-day rolling average peaked at just under 70 beats per minute around February 10th. That's the high water mark for the entire herniation arc. By that point, symptoms had been improving for a couple of weeks from consistent physical therapy. The pain was quieting down noticeably, but the data hadn't turned yet. The physiological peak came roughly 1 to 2 weeks after I started feeling meaningfully better. After February 10th, the decline is clear and sustained. By March, the monthly average had dropped roughly 8 beats from the rolling peak, back to 61.5, essentially back to my pre-herniation baseline. The data tell the same story in both directions. Escalation before and through diagnosis, a peak that lagged behind the first signs of subjective improvement, then a steady descent back to normal. Pain quieting down and the physiological stress response finishing are two different things. In this data set, there are roughly 2 weeks between them. This chart needs a caveat. Saying, my heart rate flagged at 37 days early makes for a good headline, and a misleading takeaway. I didn't build this analysis until months later. There was no dashboard running and no alert pinging me in early December to say something was off. I found this pattern by going back through a full export after the diagnosis, once I already knew where to look and what date to look around. That distinction matters. A trend that's obvious in hindsight on a chart built specifically to explain a known outcome is a very different thing from a trend that would have stood out on its own in real time against normal week-to-week noise. I can't tell you I would have caught this if I'd been watching a dashboard in early December. What I can tell you is that the pattern was there and that it lines up with a physical symptom that I also brushed off. Back pain that started in late November, nearly 3 weeks before the data crossed any kind of formal threshold. The same caveat applies to the recovery arc. The February 10th peak and the subsequent decline were identified months after the fact, not as they were happening. A slow building pattern deserves the same attention as a sudden one. The earliest version of that pattern usually shows up as a physical symptom before it shows up as a statistically significant trend. My back pain in late November was the real early signal. The chart confirmed 2 months later that something had been building the whole time. If you change something about how you sleep, sit, or move to accommodate one injury, pay attention to what that change does to the rest of your body over the following weeks. New pain with an obvious, plausible cause is still worth tracking instead of explaining away. The same logic runs in the other direction. A sustained decline in resting heart rate over multiple weeks is a more reliable signal that the body has turned a corner than a few good pain days. The data here put roughly 2 weeks between feeling better and the physiological signal catching up. The free resting heart rate tracker won't catch a slow drift like this one automatically, but it will show you your own baseline and how far you're drifting from it, which is the first step. A link to download it is in the description and pinned comment. The next video walks through how to build that baseline yourself in about 15 minutes using your own wearable export. If this one made you want to look at your own numbers, that video is for you. Remember, this video is not medical advice. It reflects my personal recovery experience and wearable data only. Disc herniation is a medical condition that needs a doctor's evaluation, not a wearables. If you have new or worsening back pain, especially with numbness, tingling, weakness, or pain radiating down a leg, contact your physician promptly rather than waiting to see if it resolves on its own. Always consult your physician or physical therapist about your own symptoms and treatment.